Chapter 331. Dragging Anne's corpse, Colin walked toward the distance. Anyway, guesses were just guesses, and he hadn't planned to openly present the fact that he had killed Andy. As long as there was no evidence, many people would convince themselves. Humph! Bowing his head, Colin found that Anne's eyes seemed to still be watching him. So in the next moment, he destroyed them without hesitation. Being alive was one thing, but what could you do after death? Casually tossing the corpse into the distance, Colin retraced his steps. It was time to deal with internal issues. On the empty plain, only Anne's body lay toppled on the ground, its hollow eye sockets staring at the sky. The sun and the moon thus revolved. Click, click, click. In the dead of night, moonlight shone upon the earth. All was peaceful and serene. The goddess of the moon, Selene, drove her Milky Way across the sky, and if one had good eyesight, they could see another person beside her. The two of them together made the moonlight even more mysterious. Those beings with innate supernatural senses could detect that the light, different from normal, contained a special power that made them feel particularly comfortable. But this had nothing to do with the humans that had survived. After dealing with two disagreeable fellows, the remaining humans quickly reached a consensus. Andy had died fighting the beast, and the injured beast had fled. As for where the beast in this deserted world came from, who knew? As night fell and people saw daylight once again, they all went to sleep. Colin alone slept on a piece of green stone, the golden box resting on his chest. Although he didn't yet know how to use it, Colin did not want to let this treasure out of his sight for a moment. Whether awake or asleep, he wanted it by his side. However, at the quietest moment of midnight, a peculiar noise faintly emanated from inside the box. Click, 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 click. After a while, at a certain moment, as if it had adapted to something, the golden box slowly opened a crack, and a wooden puppet peered its head out. After observing the environment outside, it seemed to realize the safety of the moment, then climbed out of the box completely. It looked at the moon in the sky, then at the sleeping crowd. No one noticed it, for aside from the moonlight, there was nothing nearby. Click, click, click. Torquing its body awkwardly, the puppet made its way to Colin's head. For the tiny creature, this gigantic head was much larger than its own body, so much so that it had to climb to get on top. Fortunately, the night was deep, and today's experiences had indeed left Colin exhausted. So until the end, he didn't wake up. Click. Standing on Colin's cheek, the puppet tilted its head. It stared at the slumbering middle-aged man, slowly extending its hands. It seemed to want to shove its arms into the other's eye sockets. But after a long silence, it did nothing. Not because it still harbored any kindness, but at this moment it had a better idea. Every life form needed power to survive, and it was no exception. Now, having survived in this special form, it finally understood why one needed to step into the transcendent realm to use the puppet. But it was too late for everything. Since it hadn't started on the right track, it had to make do with other methods to try to make up for it. And all this depended on a certain special energy. The night concealed everything, and accompanied by the sound of joint friction, the puppet climbed back into its new home. Only this time, when it returned, it had an additional thin notebook in its hand. The infinite pages once recorded every play of the puppet's life. Naturally, this new one would not be an exception. Click, click. The sun rose, and everything seemed as if nothing had happened. A new day had arrived, and no one knew what future awaited these survivors. Chapter 332. Prelude, the sun, the moon, and war. Dawn broke, and all things began to stir. Waking from his slumber, Colin touched the golden box, taking comfort in its cold heaviness. He looked around, and as before, aside from the resting crowd, there were no signs of other life. Perhaps because it was the first time he had taken the life of one of his own kind. His dreams last night were none too pleasant. A dead man had emerged, questioning whether he felt any remorse, but he simply sent the man off with another cut of his blade. What's done is done, what was there to regret? The indifferent attitudes of the others had already proven who was right and who was wrong. Now, rather than dwelling on the past, it was more urgent to secure more food. It's a good thing we still have plants. If there was truly nothing, we might have escaped the flood only to starve to death here. Shaking his head, despite the fact that it was a divine flood that had left them in this predicament, they still had to rely on the plants fostered by the gods to survive. Such was the insurmountable gap between mortals and deities. Rolling off the stone slab, Colin woke the others who were still in their dreams. Now that they were safe, it was time to consider their next destination. For a settlement, safety was of utmost priority, followed closely by proximity to water. The former could be temporarily ignored, as all life around them had been wiped clean, but the latter was an immediate concern. Floods are dreadful, yet humans cannot live without water. Deciding where to migrate was the issue the survivors needed to solve. First off, we can forget about the coastal areas. While I've never seen the sea myself, this disaster was sent by the sea god. Sitting on a rock, Colin spoke indifferently. I doubt anyone wants to deal with them again. Huh? What do you think? Agreed, we can't go towards the seaside, and the western side is best avoided too. That's the heart of the eastern region where they say Mount Olympus is. I don't want to gamble on the mercy of the gods. Someone nodded, but also promptly ruled out another option. In such a scenario, they were left with only two directions to choose from: south or north. To the south. It is said that the southern waterways are complex, most of them connecting to the ocean, but to the north, even the Creator has not spoken much about it. After a moment of silence, someone else spoke. If the gods pay little attention to it, then it's probably the best place for us to settle. Though the climate there is colder, the furs we have stored should suffice. As these words were uttered, they immediately elicited cries of agreement from the people, and Colin also expressed his approval. However, just as they were settling on a decision, he glanced over the crowd and suddenly furrowed his brow, asking, "Where's Ruby? Why isn't he here?" He was an old acquaintance, the first to stand up and believe in him yesterday. But strangely enough, Colin did not see him among the group. He was a bit hungry and went to look for fruit trees nearby. Though we still have some stored food, nothing beats the taste of fresh fruit. Upon hearing this explanation, Colin nodded. He wasn't particularly concerned and soon started rounding up everyone to pack their things. By midday, they had unearthed their stashed supplies, and a few who had learned the necessary skills came together to assemble a simple cart with the meager materials at hand. Others set off to gather food, since edible plants were not found everywhere. They attended to their preparations well in advance. With these tasks complete, Colin checked the position of the sun and decided they would set off formally after everyone returned in the afternoon. The blazing sun overhead was not the best time for traveling. Ah! Suddenly, a shrill scream pierced through the distance, abruptly alerting the just-settled survivors. The crowd fell silent for a brief moment, but the mournful howling continued, and the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. At this point, Colin surprisingly breathed a sigh of relief. If someone had encountered some formidable creature, it would not be possible to still be screaming now. The only likelihood was an accident. Given the circumstances, it was time for him to step forward. "Don't panic. I'll go have a look. You all stay here, don't move." He spoke loudly, stepping forward resolutely under the gaze of everyone. After walking a few hundred paces, beneath a tree's shade, he saw the screaming figure clutching his wrist. It was Ruby, who had left earlier. Scattered around him were some fruits, and a sharp part of a large stone beneath the tree was smeared with blood, silently narrating what had just happened. The events were clear. It was the mishap of Ruby slipping while picking fruit from the tree, crashing his wrist against the stone, and breaking it as a result. "Ah, save me!" Seeing a familiar face, Ruby desperately cried out for help, his pain making him feel as if he was dying. Seeing this, Colin hurried over to support him. "Don't panic, you're just injured in the hand. Looks beyond saving, but luckily it's the left, not so problematic." He tried to comfort him, but Ruby's cries of pain didn't stop. As Colin looked at Ruby's wrist still bleeding, a shadow of gloom draped over his mind. They were few in number, and those he was on good terms with were even fewer. He hoped there would be no more accidents along the journey to come, or else the long road of migration promised to be full of hardships. In the wake of the disaster, Colin's group was but a minor chapter on the vast earth. Outside of themselves, no one paid heed to these remnants of a bygone era. Heading north, the weather gradually grew colder, but fortunately, there were still plenty of animal furs left, helping them fend off the increasingly bitter chill. Chapter 333. However, the climate was but a minor concern. Along the way, what truly began to unsettle Colin's party was the accidents that occurred every so often. In the beginning, no one paid much attention, dismissing it as an individual's bad luck. But as the incidents became more frequent, panic started to spread among the crowd. There had been attempts to escape the group, but the outcome was far from good. The horribly mutilated corpse of a runaway was found days later, and what unspeakable horrors they suffered before death remained a mystery. Everyone thought this was a punishment by the deities. Perhaps they still couldn't escape the disaster. Only Colin's eyes widened at the scene. The manner of the corpse's death was all too familiar to him. There were rumors among the bronze humanity about souls. It was said that the stronger and more obsessed a soul became in life, the more likely it could resist the call from the deep spirit realm after death, lingering between this world and the surface of the spirit realm, surviving in an alternate form. Some said that during days when the plague spread, those transparent figures wandering through the city at night were the souls of the deceased, clinging to the mortal realm, reluctant to leave. In that moment, Colin connected all the dots, thinking about the strange little tricks, and then what he himself had done. He couldn't help feeling a chill. Yet in the end he said nothing, and continued leading the people onward. If these people knew that the source of the accidents might be related to him, Colin probably wouldn't be able to sleep again. Luckily, it hadn't come to that yet, and somehow he felt that these accidents weren't meant to kill them. It just didn't want to let them leave, letting them live in fear. This thought caused a flicker of speculation to pass through Colin's eyes. This behavior felt strangely familiar to him. As the three groups of bronze humanity successively departed on the other side, beyond the vast Panassus mountain range, opposite the Delphic Great Plains, new humans finally appeared upon the earth. They looked around in bewilderment, but this time, no one came to guide them. Even Deucalion and Pytha were not allowed to stay behind, or rather, had it not been for Themis's intervention, they wouldn't have been able to preserve their lives. The new humans would have to understand this world on their own. They might suffer some deaths and injuries, but it would also make them truly aware of the dangers of this world, and later appreciate the preciousness of safety. They were destined to migrate away from Delphi, for it marked the boundary of the flood. On the other side of the mountains, even the mountains themselves, the beasts and mighty creatures were unaffected. Driven by them, humans would scatter in all directions, gradually spreading to every corner of the earth. The territories previously defined by the gods would become relevant at this time. Then, they would show divine signs at the appropriate time, prompting humans to seek their protection spontaneously and build temples to worship them. However, there are always exceptions. Compared to the land, the sea struggled to gain populations through this primitive diffusion, forcing the divine king to allow some sea gods to take a few humans to the islands. It was both a blessing and a constraint, for the areas of the islands were limited after all, while only the mainland could sustain millions of mortals. And so, as seasons changed, the mortal realm underwent various transformations, which did not affect the eternity of the deities. It seemed the gods had returned to their old ways, using banquets and nectar to release their boundless energy. Until one day, Zeus discovered with joy that following the bloodline's call, he was about to have offspring. 2 offspring were about to come into this world. It was Leto, the goddess of nursery coming from the stars, whom the divine king had tried to sense. The response from his authority was a warm and intense light. There was no doubt, a mighty deity was about to be born. If it had been before, the divine king would have been deeply cautious, but now, he had grown somewhat indifferent. Even Métis, who was fated to bear him a son and a daughter, could be silenced so quietly, which showed that nothing was unchangeable in the face of true power. If his grandfather had not unified patriarchy and kingship with the sky but had the power to contend with the primordial gods through a single authority, and if his father had possessed such great power from the start of his reign, perhaps they too could have held off the advent of fate. Of course, the reason they did not possess such power might well be an effect of fate itself, but that was of no concern to Zeus. The king of a foreign realm, a power from beyond the world, was something outside the chaos world, and now that he had the chance, he shouldn't hesitate any longer. However, the joy belonged to him and not to them. When Zeus entered Hera's chamber, an icy chill almost hit him in the face. "Hera, you too are about to bear our child. Even before his birth, I can already feel his keen spirit. Olympus will soon have another powerful pillar. Does that not warrant a smile from you?" Entering Hera's chamber, Zeus ignored the greeting from Aglaea, who was heading out of the palace. Indeed, not just Leto, but using the sensation from the half of fertility authority, he learned of this good news. Hera was also carrying his progeny. Chapter 334. However, judging from the timeline, my heavenly empress seems to be a bit later than expected. Therefore, seeing Hera's sullen face, Zeus felt no surprise at all. "Smile? Are you referring to cheering up that old woman? Celebrating that her children will be born before mine and become the great divine king's eldest son?" With a cold snort, Hera didn't show Zeus any warmth in her expression, and the divine king had nothing to say in return. In fact, Zeus was somewhat helpless himself. He too had wished to have an eldest son with Hera first, as he had never entertained the thought of anyone else taking Hera's place. But for some reason, although things had been fine at the start of their marriage, over the past few decades, Hera had been intentionally or unintentionally avoiding him until only recently things had returned to normal. Perhaps it was his relationship with Demeter that had soured her mood. He shook his head internally, but Zeus did not regret his actions. His forceful possession of another sister of his was not solely for lust, but also other reasons. The divine king saw Hades' interest in Demeter, but he didn't want this powerful sister to leave Olympus and become queen of the underworld. So he took a more direct approach to decisively end Hades' hopes. That way, when the other party came to him using a past promise as justification, he had an excuse to rebuff them. "What do you plan to do, Hera? No matter what, Leto's children are innocent after all, and they can't shake your position." He rubbed his temples and asked slowly. A sensation from the law told him that Leto's children were extraordinary. They carried vitality and strength and were destined to be two powerful divine children, at least one, certainly. As twins, it was difficult for Zeus to predict their powers before they were born, but even one would suffice. Having just received a divine ceremony, he would soon have powerful children. While the divine king was contemplative of fate's favor, he was also wary of Hera acting irrationally. Fortunately, though Hera's attitude was far from polite, her actions nevertheless brought the divine king some relief. "That's my business. Zeus, since you can't control yourself, I'll use my own methods to ensure that no one will surpass me." Her expression was cold. Since sharing power with Zeus, Hera had never used her authority of the heavenly empress, but this time was an exception. In front of Zeus, the law of fertility was greatly strengthened by the authority of the heavenly empress. In this moment, a temporary rule was added to the world. Before the birth of Hera's children, as long as Leto remained within the lands ruled by the divine court, the law of fertility would resist her, preventing the birth of her divine son and divine daughter. Even though such an overt defiance of instinctual law couldn't last long, the heavenly empress didn't need it to endure much. "Now you may leave." She glanced at Zeus indifferently and dismissed him with a wave of her hand. He wasn't there to see her. He simply wanted to know how she would react to this situation. And she believed that this merciless king couldn't care less whether Leto suffered. After all, everything was her doing, and it had nothing to do with the divine king. "Very well then, Hera. I won't stay any longer." Just as the heavenly empress predicted, Zeus didn't intend to quibble over such verbal trivialities with Hera. The divine king also wasn't much concerned with what she had just done. Thus, having received an answer, he turned and left her chambers. The palace fell quiet, and after a long while, Aglaia, who had just left, came back through a side door and bowed slightly to Hera. They had been discussing something before, and Zeus's arrival had interrupted them. Continue, Aglaia. After you took him to the sea, into whose hands did you entrust him? Gently grasping the armrest, Hera inquired. My cousin, daughter of Nereus and Doris, Thetis adopted him. Bending slightly, Aglaia spoke. The serene face of the young girl was devoid of any superfluous expressions. This matter entrusted to her by the heavenly empress decades ago. She had always executed very well. A child of the primitive sea god. Good. Definitely much stronger than my brother. Her expression inscrutable. It was hard to discern what Hera thought of the child that had finally been born not long ago. His ugly appearance, his disabled body. She didn't want him to stay on Mount Olympus, but she wished for him to have a rather decent childhood. At the very least, he wouldn't have to spend his lengthy life immersed in darkness and deathly stillness like she had. Have Nereus bring some humans to the island where he is, the godhood of the volcano is still too weak. If he can seize the opportunity, perhaps there's still a chance for him to return to Mount Olympus in another way. For those with value, like those Cyclopes, our divine king does not care about their appearances. Yes, your majesty. As if she hadn't heard the latter part of Hera's words, Aglaia accepted the orders and left, leaving Hera alone in the great hall. She gently stroked her abdomen, where another life was robustly growing. Feeling his vitality and sharpness, Hera finally revealed a smile. You at least mustn't be inferior to Leto's children. Show your abilities. When the time comes, I will also give you the very best. As for what would happen if he couldn't surpass them, Hera didn't ponder much. Being the firstborn son conceived by two potent divine powers, already possessing such immense authority even before birth, the result naturally wouldn't disappoint her. In the Olympian divine lineage, 3 new deities were about to be born, but in the third era, their gestation was so tranquil and unnoticed, with only the goddess of nursery weaving between the sky and the sea over time, letting more and more mortals know of the heavenly empress's ruthlessness. Just like the one locked within Zeus's mind, under the power of the queen of God's authority, unless someone openly declared that this place was not under the divine court's rule, Leto's child could not be born. She had asked the sea god, asked Hades, but they all refused her, so the goddess could only wander helplessly between heaven and earth, unable to find any deity willing to intervene in the family dispute of the divine king. Even her parents, the lightless celestial deity Zeus, turned Leto away from his doorstep. In the past, this reclusive ancient god had already warned her to stay away from the divine court, especially from the divine king, but Leto was immersed in Zeus's sweet nothings. Thus, when she turned to them, the ancient Titan god turned a blind eye to her. Only the deity Asteria secretly felt compassion for her sister's plight. In the original myth, Leto's sister would eventually commit an act in defiance of the heavenly empress's commands, transforming a falling star into an island for her childbirth. But this time, fate took a completely different direction. One night, the moon in the sky and the moon in the spirit realm both sensed a closeness, and to the southeast of the earth, an existence closely related to them was being nurtured. And so, on this day, the silver chariot took a turn, changing direction in the night sky, sparking endless speculation among mortals, and the first oracle from the land of Starfall also descended in front of the temple, humble yet clearly built with intent. Chapter 335. Only one day. Across the lofty mountains, beyond the rivers, over the sea, under the night sky, Leto wandered helplessly between heaven and earth. Yet there was nowhere for her to rest, for compared to her, the Queen of Gods undoubtedly invoked greater fear. Or rather, it wasn't that Hera wasn't important, but when she made such a decision wielding the divine authority of the heavenly empress, her command also represented the divine court itself. Under these circumstances, naturally, no one was willing to oppose the order of the divine court for Leto, who had even been abandoned by her own parents. Hera! Clenching her jaw, Leto tightened her fists. Just a few years ago, she was still immersed in the joy of bearing Zeus's offspring. But now, All that joy had turned into rage, tormenting her soul every moment. Her fury wasn't directed at Zeus. In fact, the Divine King had anticipated that Hera wouldn't let the matter slide so easily, so he had made preparations early on. He had told Leto about the difficulties he faced as the Divine King, the perilous situations he had to confront. Outside, the Titans refused to submit, and there were beings like Mother Earth and the deities of the spirit realm threatening his kingship. Internally, his brothers covetously eyed the throne, and Hera was a woman with a strong sense of jealousy. In order not to fall into disarray amidst external threats, he had no choice but to make repeated compromises to Hera, to the extent that even the Divine King could not prevent certain behaviors of the Heavenly Empress. Clearly, this action was what Zeus had previously hinted at as certain behaviors. 9 truths and 1 lie, coupled with a handsome appearance and past affections. Leto, as the goddess of nursery, was easily moved by Zeus's appeal to her protective instinct and sympathy, even forgetting the vast disparity between their status and power. Even now, as Hera's power chased her, leaving her unable to find refuge in heaven or earth, she still did not believe this to be Zeus's fault. She merely etched Hera's name in her heart in secret and vowed to avenge herself one day. Even if she herself lacked the ability, her children would surely be capable. They would become the Divine King's strong supporters, and then they would make that malicious queen of gods rue her actions. Ah! Flying through mid-air, as Leto was once again turned away over the sea, she prepared to head to a secluded valley. It was said that there, the previous heavenly empress, the mother goddess Rhea of the Olympian gods, lived in seclusion, information Zeus had inadvertently revealed to her. However, just as she caught sight of the coastline, an intense abdominal pain shot through her body. Almost instantly, Leto knew what was happening. This wasn't the first time. The daughter who should have been born clashed with the laws that prevented her birth, driven by instinct. The unborn goddess naturally could not resist the authority of the heavenly empress, but that didn't stop the collision from causing harm to her mother. Under severe pain, Leto lost control of her power in an instant. She streaked across the sky, plummeting straight down, but fortunately, the coast lay ahead. Crash! With a resounding impact, Leto smashed onto the sandy beach beside this bay. Blue light flickered on and off around her, the inherent power of her daughter, and under this pulsing light, Leto once again experienced intense agony. After a time, the collision finally ended. Leto lay on her back on the beach for quite a while before slowly sitting up. Soaked in sweat, she endured the soreness throughout her body and surveyed her surroundings. A bay that shaped like a crescent moon, calm and gentle waves. In the future, this would become an excellent natural harbor. Ocean currents originating from the deep sea passed by here, bringing numerous fish that migrated seasonally to spawn, and not far from the coast lay a sizable tract of woodland. However, Leto was unaware of this, and her evaluation was simply nice scenery. Moving her gaze away from here, she sensed a special aura in the distance away from the coast instead. That feeling, she had experienced more than once. Pure and warm, it went straight to the soul. It had appeared on Helios's sun chariot, later stolen by Prometheus. There are humans here? Some doubt crossed her mind, but Leto was surprised rather than preoccupied with further thought. Logically, the new generation of humans that had just been born should not be in this place, but it didn't concern her much. Humans are the treasure of the gods, perhaps brought here by some deity. Poseidon, lord of the sea, was very likely. He was not one to follow rules, and perhaps this was the human city he built in defiance of his promises. Conveniently, she was planning to find a place to recover, and since there were humans here, they were obliged to serve her, which would also be an honor for these mortals. Not just anyone is qualified to host a deity, but now, Leto graciously conferred this privilege upon them. Thus, following the guide of the aura, under the night sky, she made her way toward the faintly glowing lights. The night was deep, and even though there were no clouds, the moon was still nowhere to be seen. This led the humans on Earth to believe they had mistaken the date, that it was actually a rare day of stars without moon. Fortunately, unlike animals, Humans utilized tools, so in this hastily erected temporary dwelling, there was still plenty of light. Some lights were at the openings of erected wooden fences, where guards kept the night watch. Others were high atop a cliff, where the first building erected served as a temple for the gods. Faith and security, these were the two things most on the minds of the people who had just embarked on a long journey of migration. Chapter 336. As their leader, bathed in the glow of a ball of light, Nuwa and Cohen sat by a rough stone table, casually discussing future developments. We're still short of hands, but we can't neglect the future. Everything needs to have a plan beforehand, built on a sufficient scale. Constructing the temple, opening up fields, building houses. Even tens of thousands would find it hard to complete these tasks within 3 seasonal changes, let alone us, who don't even number in the thousands. Shaking his head slightly, Nuwa seemed to be complaining about the difficult situation. But Cohen could tell at a glance that the other's mood was actually quite good. Of course, not just Nuwa, Cohen's mood at this moment was equally good. Trudging over mountains and through rivers to blaze trails, although the land was now devoid of wild beasts, the dangers of nature were still significant. Yet not long ago, they finally found this place guided by starlight. A quiet bay, fertile land, exposed ores on the surface, and a sizable freshwater lake. Apart from lacking dangerous terrain, this place had almost all the excellent conditions for establishing a city. So, they immediately took root here, building an altar for the sacred fire and the temple for the worship of the deity. It was a huge project in itself, because even the temple of the bronze humanity had largely relied on Prometheus's help to complete those magnificent constructions in primitive times. But now, humans led by Nuwa, though without the help of the deity, had Cohen, whose power in the mortal realm was no less than that of the deity. Hence, the temple was quickly erected on the highest cliff, but when it came to the statues of the gods, the two encountered a difficulty. Neither Nuwa nor Cohen knew how to carve the Lord's image, so out of helplessness, they enshrined the astrolabe instead. Using a sacred artifact in place of the god's image was a barely acceptable solution. It will develop, Nuwa, after all, we already have a new generation. Perhaps the populace is small now, but the next generation will have populations multiplied manifold. One day, millions of humans will live here, establishing a magnificent civilization. It won't be like the golden humanity, clinging to the old ways for a millennium without change, nor like bronze humanity, fleeting in a moment, but will endure forever. Feeling a little emotional yet reflective. At this moment, Cohen vaguely felt that the strange sensation he had experienced during his confrontation with Triton once again welled up in his heart. But this time it wasn't as intense as before. There were no swift changes, only slow and steady. You're right, Cohen. The holy city cannot be built in a day, and I need not be so hasty. Beside him, Nuwa smiled, looking toward the west where the freshwater lake lay. Since they were guided here by starlight, Nuwa named it Falling Star Lake, and those water nymphs they encountered along the way settled there. As for now, numerous temporary wooden houses had been built around the area, for on their journey, many humans had become spouses to those nymphs witnessed by Nuwa. Before long, new members would join this freshly built city, their presence heralding that when this generation passes, others will continue the civilization. Buzz! After chatting for a bit more, although it was already deep into the night, Nuwa's spirits were still high. Suddenly, a buzzing sound emanated from the only completed building in the distance. Nuwa and Cohen promptly stood up, and within their gaze, specks of starlight overflowed from the high cliffs, illuminating the surrounding seas. That is, the gods have finally answered us. First, they were startled, then joy flooded their hearts. Ever since arriving here, Nuwa had prayed daily in the temple, hoping for further guidance from the Lord. But during these days, he had achieved nothing and had not even felt the sensation of being watched. Unexpectedly today, a divine sign appeared before them. Let's go. Let's head over together. With a call, Nuwa immediately strode towards the temple. The angel, whom they had met only once, had said that she would provide further guidance once they reached their destination. She would bestow them with extraordinary powers, allowing those who believed in God to bask in the glory of divinity to some extent. Perhaps today was the day, yet compared to power, Nuwa had many more questions to ask, like how he should compile the teachings for the Lord, ensuring that the faith and their lineage would flow on forever. Before long, the human settlement was within sight. Deity was still deity, even if Leto had just sustained considerable loss of her vital essence. Her body remained beyond mortal comparison. A distance that would take a common person half a day to cross was not far for her, and soon she spotted human figures. Yet standing here, Leto began to feel surprised and suspicious, for she sensed a faint sun aura on the humans who seemed to be on guard. Is this divine fragments of the ancient god of sun scattered? For a moment, Leto thought these might be the descendants of the god of sun, left unknown but in the very next moment, the goddess discerned the difference between this power and that of Helios. The latter's presence was far from as pure. He only represented the orderly aspect of the sun's movement, and when the sun chariot was forged, the inherently aggressive aspect was further diminished. Chapter 337. But the one before them now, despite being so weak as to be negligible, was far closer to the sun itself than Helios. Who? A harsh shout came. Leto's undisguised approach had finally been discovered. Two human guards lifted their torches high, and under the glow of the fire, Leto's figure was seen by them. An unknown female, perhaps some kind of elf or maybe even a deity or demigod. For a moment, the two guards became anxious. They did not know why the stranger had come nor what she intended to do here. However, across from them, the goddess paid no heed to the mortals' reactions. She simply stepped forward, revealing her own divine essence, and then she spoke loudly. "Stand down. I am Leto, daughter of Ceus and Phoebe, descendant of Heavenly Father and Mother Earth, a naturally great and born deity. Mortals, I command you to prepare food and a chamber for me immediately, as is your proper tribute to the gods." As her words ended, Leto quietly awaited the mortals' prostration and worship, which was unquestionable. Even if they were followers of other deities, they would still bow to the true form of another god. But after a brief moment, the goddess became angry when she realized that not only did these humans show no intention of prostrating themselves before her, but they were also making the opposite move. One ran back, seemingly to notify someone, while the other kept a wary eye on her. Seeing this, a nameless rage surged in her heart. Leto could not believe that after being persecuted by the heavenly empress, rejected by the gods, even the lowly mortals now dared to act this way towards her. "Mortal, I give you one last chance. Although your attitude has already made me forego rewarding you, if you choose to repent now, I can still forgive your offense." With a cold laugh, Leto warned once more. Humans are treasures to gods, but those before her were not her own treasures. Thus, in order to avoid provoking another unknown deity at such a juncture, she had yet to directly punish these shallow believers. To prevent these humans from having never heard of her before, the pressure belonging to a deity was unabashedly exerted by the goddess. If it were not upon the surface of the earth, such pressure could itself crush the mortals before her. The air trembled slightly, the divine oppression even slightly affecting matter, but the result once again infuriated Leto, as the human not only failed to bow to her but instead raised his weapon. Who did he think he was? A servant daring to draw a sword against his master. Humph! With a cold snort, Leto no longer hesitated. Such humans, even if killed, would not be a concern to any god. After all, regardless of the situation, they were all of the deity race. Just like in later eras, during the age of great seafaring, when humans came to the New World, they slaughtered the natives by day, yet by night they were good husbands and good neighbors. The benevolence of most people ultimately extended only to their own kind, not to the uncivilized others they saw. So, removing her golden bracelet, Leto casually threw it forward. Under the transcendently powerful force inherent to a divine body, the gold streaked through the air almost in the blink of an eye, striking directly at the guard's body. Clang! However, with the sound of a collision, the guard remained unscathed. A silver light covered the surface of his body, and instead, the bracelet itself was repelled and flew away. Who? First startled, then abruptly turning around. That was where the power came from, saving the human just now. Leto was about to question the comber, but she froze in place the next moment. There, two figures, one red, one white, were slowly walking their way. So, the presence you sensed comes from her? Having casually saved the human's life, Hecate did not spare him a glance. The goddess of the magic net cared not for the life or death of a stranger. She did so half because of the familiar essence deep within the dwelling, and half because of that woman. Encountering each other here was somewhat unexpected for her. Although many years had passed, Hecate still remembered certain events quite clearly. Yes, do you know her? If the relationship is not good, then let's go. Noticing that the atmosphere was a bit odd, Selene, standing aside, said quietly. Despite her tall figure that made her seem like an elder to the red-clothed witch, the moon goddess's voice was as feeble as ever. Leave? That's not necessary. But I do indeed know her, even if. Holding on to Selene standing by her side, Hecate suddenly had an enigmatic smile on her lips. She looked at the black-robed goddess opposite her, and on her side, Leto's gaze held disbelief and avoidance. She's probably my relative, Selene, to be more precise. She's my aunt, although. The words paused momentarily, then Hecate continued with a smile. Although she only was for one day. Chapter 338. 3 Conditions and Maturity. A day. As Hecate's voice fell, a noticeable silence descended upon the scene for an instant. Leto looked at the goddess in the red dress before her, her hesitation turning into a mix of surprise and doubt, while Selene glanced at the black-robed goddess across from her and finally understood her identity. The sister of the goddess of stars, Asteria, the Titan goddess Leto. Over the years, as Selene guided her silver moon chariot across the sky, she had seen this goddess meeting with the divine king under the cover of night more than once, and the other party's recent plight was no secret either. After all, the zodiac and Bainua territories are the core of the starry sky, and when Leto went to the dwelling of Ceus, the principal god of the Titans, she could not avoid the gaze of the goddess of the moon. So watching this scene, Selene closed her mouth, deciding to remain a quiet bystander. Although the reason they came here was Selene's subtle premonition, now, she thought it was better to let Hecate deal with the situation herself. Are you the child of Asteria? During the turnover of the epics, you were actually the goddess of the magic net? Leto could hardly believe it but had no choice but to accept it, as the familiar bloodline aura and unique power in front of her proclaimed the other's identity. There had never been a deity who could be born twice, and Leto had not dared to confirm that the deity who had once again proclaimed her birth to the world was the daughter of her banished sister. But now such was the reality. Why do you obstruct me? You two belong to the deity race. This mortal dares to disregard my command. Should I not punish his insolence? Having recognized the visitor, Leto's aura softened slightly, but her attitude toward the just-escaped mortal remained unchanged. Deity race? Are you referring to me? Raising an eyebrow, Hecate's lips still bore a smile. It seems that was the case. I once was a Titan deity, but just like our kinship, it probably only lasted a day. Hecate had observed every event that had ever taken place on Mount Othrys through the reenactment on the slabs. That fateful negotiation that decided her fate. Leto didn't have the standing to be present, but the goddess's stance was unmistakable. When she was exiled to the earth, and even when she vanished quietly among the tribes of humans, the humans at that time pleaded for forgiveness in their worship of the deities. But the outcome was obvious. Not a single deity spared a glance, including the goddess of stars and Leto. It was as if she was forgotten, or rather, no one wished to remember such an unfortunate symbol. Of course, Hecate didn't harbor much resentment against them. After all, the thin familial affections among Chaos's deities were not an exception. At most, she chose not to see them as kin. In comparison, it was her nominal father and maternal grandmother who truly left a lasting impression on the goddess of the magic net. Cast into the abyss for a permanent solution, and even that didn't quite satisfy them. Thinking this, Hecate couldn't help but smile again. It was a pity she had not been able to find the whereabouts of Perse, the god of material destruction. Given his extraordinary divine power and close kinship with Crius, the god of meteorology, he should not have disappeared without a trace. The goddess of the magic net pondered, and across from her, Leto was becoming aware of the indifference under Hecate's smile. But indeed, the decision back then had come from the former divine king and her own divine parents. If the other party was indeed a true god, it would be understandable for her to be discontent with it. It was merely an accident, Hecate. There has never been immortality at birth, and no deity of lower rank than a territorial god has appeared since you. Perhaps your innate godhood was obscured, or for some reason, it failed to manifest, resulting in a misjudgment. You have already become a true god. Cronus, who exiled you from the Titan deity clan, is nowhere to be found. The new king of all gods has already acknowledged your status. You should stand alongside the pantheon, and end up like you, with nowhere to go in Hera's presence, unable to demonstrate your might before mortals? You should thank me, otherwise you'll soon realize that even in front of mortals, you can't show any might at all. Without mincing words, Hecate mocked, pulling the nearby Selene closer to herself. It was because of her that they had come here. Why was she hiding behind now? Since it's you, that makes things simpler. You've been fleeing everywhere because of Hera, even carrying the child of golden mane. With a light snort, Hecate continued, I can solve the difficulties you're facing, but you must agree to 3 conditions of mine. What conditions? Leto's spirits lifted. The anger stirred by Hecate's words instantly quelled. Right now, what Leto wanted most was to resolve the divine authority of the heavenly Empress Hera and bring forth her children with the divine king without issue. For that, there was nothing she was not willing to give. That thing you sensed, is it on her? Without answering immediately, Hecate turned instead to ask Selene. I don't know. Perhaps it's not an object? Confused, Selene glanced again at the distant black-robed goddess. She indeed had felt something deeply connected to her, but standing here, the goddess of the moon started to doubt, because she felt the object of that connection seemed to be Leto herself. Chapter 339. Well then, whatever it is. Nodding her head, Hecate said to Leto, You have something related to the moon, although I do not yet know what it is. I need it. I also want to know everything about Persephone. All that you know you must tell me. Finally, this is the first and also the last thing I will do for you. After this, we are even. Even? What do you mean by even? Leto could understand the first 2 conditions. The godhood of deities could sometimes produce some unexpected senses. Perhaps she indeed possessed some moon-related item that she was not aware of, and since the other party wanted it, she may as well give it to her. As for the whereabouts of Persephone, that was Hecate's father god, and although it appeared that neither side recognized this connection much, Leto had no intention of concealing the other's whereabouts for her. Moreover, she herself was not very clear on Persephone's exact whereabouts. But the last condition, had Hecate ever owed her anything? You do not need to know, you just have to be clear that after this, we are even. After a moment of silence, Hecate said with a smile, All right, I agree. Nodding her head, Leto did not dwell on these other matters. By the Styx River as my witness, as long as you can rid me of Hera's power, I will agree to your 3 demands. Nodding in agreement, as Leto's words fell, the power of the Styx flashed and was gone. Across from her, watching the goddess make her decision without hesitation, beneath Hecate's smile was a slight coldness. Indeed, just as she had thought, the swaddling that had once wrapped the infant girl as she fell from Mount of the Gods, although it was transformed by the goddess of nursery's divine power, it was never truly an act of familial love, but rather an instinctive reaction after delivering her sister's child. But this was just as well, for in the future in this world, whether it be the stars or the land, the ocean or the abyss, there were no longer any family worth her concern. She came to this world alone and she would walk it alone. Suddenly feeling her hand being held, Hecate looked at Selene beside her, but in her companion's worried eyes, she simply shook her head with a smile. I am fine, Selene. just remembering some past memories. Let's go. Breaking Hera's power is not difficult. Power from the divine court can naturally be solved by the divine court itself. Waving her hand, Hecate looked towards the human settlement not far away. However, this does not mean you are safe. Unless you can make Zeus stand up for you, the past few years may have been just the beginning. Delphic Great Plains. The impending birth of Leto's children affected the fates of more than one deity. In fact, those who perceived them were not limited to the moon goddess and the spirit realm. The secluded mother of light was one of them. But Thea had already seen the simple logic of reality's laws. It would not allow divine authority too powerful to accumulate on any unchecked existence. So faced with the destined division of godhood, the goddess was quite open to it. Another one touched was the golden apple tree, which had instincts but no thoughts. Just as the true sun had nothing to do with Leto's son at first, the divine authority of the goddess's other child never included the moon originally. She was the master of the wilderness, protector of forests, a symbol of the hunt, the goddess who wielded the golden bow, and one of the symbols of pure maidenhood. So at this moment, the true progenitor of plants was also touched by unknown forces. Perhaps stimulated, following it, under Moanda's gaze, the fruit that had been nearly complete matured at a speed visible to the naked eye. The two successive changes had brought the fruit, which the nymphs had estimated to need 300 years to mature originally, close to perfection. Could be today, or maybe tomorrow, that this divine fruit would mature, becoming the supreme creation of this world, allowing a postnatal life to share the immortal divine authority. Too fast. Some excitement, mixed with hesitation. The enticing voice of the ancient serpent seemed still to echo in her ears, and now, Moanda could no longer evade. She needed to confront an upcoming reality, that if she truly took this step, Mother Earth would inevitably see her as a deadly foe. Moanda understood Gaia. She wasn't the kind to weigh pros and cons. When she awakened, when she realized her own maids had betrayed her, when she discovered the golden apples had been taken from her, and even the life vase had completely fallen into the hands of others, what the enraged Mother Earth might do was unpredictable to anyone. If the laws of the present world couldn't protect her, hiding in the mortal realm wouldn't help. Moanda believed that, even if it meant falling into slumber for another 1,000 years, Gaia would never let her go because of these costs, unless she could make her old master realize that she couldn't do anything to this traitorous elf. So for Moanda at this moment, she had to find a backer for herself. That day just happened to be when the new divine king arrived. Whether it's him or not, I can go and see at that time. The last two divine kings weren't afraid of Mother Earth. He should be the same, right? If that's the case, then since he dared to have me do such a thing, he must be prepared to confront Mother Earth. If not, then I'll just have to pay a visit to the other primordial gods. Having made her decision quietly, Moanda knew that, no matter what, there was no turning back for her now. This special fruit was hanging there. Whether she ate it or not, the outcome would be the same. Besides, if she was honest with herself, Moanda was clear that even if given another chance, she would still make the same choice without hesitation. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, even if it meant becoming a pawn against Gaia, she had to take her place at the table first, to earn the right to see what the board looked like. Soon. What's coming soon? On the other side of the golden apple orchard, Veda looked at her friend nearby with curiosity. For the past few decades, her friend always seemed to be muttering to herself. I mean the fruit of the golden apple tree. Moanda replied directly, her lips pressed together. She knew that to others, that fruit looked no different from a normal golden apple. As expected, upon hearing the explanation, Veda simply nodded in agreement. Indeed, this divine fruit, which had started to develop from the turnover of the epic, indeed grew faster than usual. That is strange indeed. Usually, it takes hundreds of years for one to mature, but this one is growing so quickly. Raising her head, listening to the rustling sound of the wind brushing through the golden leaves, the nymph remained as carefree as ever. Yes, Veda, perhaps it's just meant to be. Smiling, Moanda turned around. At the end of her gaze, shadows covered everything below the tall, continuous mountain range, and there stood the Temple of Delphi, the Panasus Mountains, where the deity had descended not long ago. If it were the past, any deity approaching Delphi, regardless of their purpose, would definitely come to pay respects to Mother Earth, to show their reverence for the Mother Goddess. But with the slumber of Mother Earth, this place was as if forgotten, no longer able to attract any deity's attention. This was normal, for even Mother Earth's maids were valuable only because of the god. Just like those humans who had died in the Great Flood not long ago, although Moanda had never seen them, she could guess the reason for their deaths. It was simply because they were no longer of value, so the deities wanted to replace them with a new batch, that's all. Veda. Turning slightly, Veda looked at her friend beside her with confusion. Soon, when they look at me again, it will not be because of someone else. With a calm facial expression, at that moment, the nymph recalled the day that was the most memorable in her memory. The Queen of Gods greeted, the Divine King gave thanks, even though it wasn't for her. But after that day ended, a trace of wild ambition was born in Moanda's heart. One day, she too would stir the winds of the entire world with a messenger, a golden apple, just like Mother Earth. Soon, leaving the golden apple orchard, Moanda headed towards the oracle. There should be a place for me in the heavens. Chapter 340 Gifts and Birth. The special fruit would still need a day or two to ripen, and outside the not yet constructed city, the figure of the black-robed goddess had already disappeared without a trace. Since Leto had agreed to the request, Hecate had, as promised, fulfilled her commitment, which was not difficult for her. The goddess of the magic net simply extended her slender fingers and made a slight gesture in the void, and some kind of shackle was silently unlocked. Once, upon ascending to the throne, Zeus had promised that he would grant Hecate the right to be independent of the divine court, that the sky, the ocean, and the earth could not bind her. Though Hecate was not particularly concerned with this gift, she had nonetheless accepted it at the time. Now, the divine king's promise had finally found a use, albeit on his lover and the heavenly empress herself. The Queen of God's power stemmed from the divine king, and Zeus's word was the same. The two just slightly collided, and the limitations set by Hera disappeared without form or trace. Feeling a long-lost sense of relief, Leto couldn't wait to leave the place. If there were further delays, no one knew what Hera might do next, so no matter how the heavenly empress planned to cope, Leto was determined to give birth to the divine king's firstborn today, an outcome now unchangeable. "Hey, what's your name?" After Leto had departed, the faithful guard who had been dutifully stationed was finally remembered by the two goddesses left behind. Turning around, Hecate casually inquired, "My name is Lorraine, your highnesses." His enunciation was clear, and although Hecate had just helped him, the guard named Lorraine still firmly adhered to his duties. "Our leader will be here shortly. Please wait a moment." "Very well." In response to Lorraine's reply, Hecate merely nodded, for she sensed a familiar presence swiftly approaching their location. Indeed, in just a short while, accompanied by the sound of the air being torn, Cohen's figure appeared there. "Lorraine, that deity is... you?" His expression was somewhat surprised, as the person who had gone back to report had not described it this way. He had told Cohen that a woman claiming to be a Titan deity had arrived here, and her demeanor was not friendly. Given the human survivor's experience of a world-ending flood, one could imagine their perception of the old gods. No one thought Leto harbored good intentions, which was why the two guards were so vigilant earlier. However, the scene before him clearly differed. Cohen could assure himself, Hecate definitely was not one of the Titans. It's me. It's been a long time indeed. But speaking of which, Uncle Cohen, do you have a place to stay here?" Waving her hand, Hecate was not at all reserved. "I'm going to wait here for my reward. And of course, I can help you build this place as a thank you for my temporary stay. You wouldn't refuse me, would you?" "Of course not." After a moment of silence, looking at the red-skirted girl who had never changed, Cohen nodded his head. It was not the first time the two had met since Hecate left the foot of Mount Othrys, but Cohen still did not know what to say. Perhaps it was because he used to care for her by the god's decree, yet was forbidden to communicate with her, Cohen had gradually become accustomed to listening to her talk while he remained silent. However, recalling the divine oracle Nuwa had received earlier, he turned to look at Selene beside him, and this sudden attention made the moon goddess involuntarily step back, as if she had forgotten her years of witchcraft training. "What are you going to do?" The human leader, also the unanimously elected high priest, has received a divine oracle that today, 2 moon goddesses would come here, and the Lord's angel has brought a gift for each of them. While the whereabouts of the other moon goddess were still unknown, the one before him was undoubtedly one of them. "Come with me. It's modest, but this is all we have for now." Passing through the gate between wooden fences, the human settlement was revealed before the 2 goddesses. As Cohen had said, it indeed appeared quite rudimentary. The ground was merely compacted, with no defined roads or dwellings. Instead of resembling a city, the place seemed more like a temporary encampment. Since the population was small, the living area was also not extensive, and it didn't take long for Hecate to encounter Nuwa. Overseeing the team, organizing tasks, after several years of experience, Nuwa had transformed from a young man of only faith and goodwill into a competent leader. He was dressed in a white ceremonial robe, approaching the 2 goddesses from afar. "Are you their leader?" Curiously observing her surroundings, what caught Hecate's eye the most was the temple atop the sea cliff. "I thought Uncle Cohen was still in charge here. Like with the golden humanity, you don't look much like a fighter. And compared to the past humans, you seem quite different." At least their reaction to seeing a deity was not like yours. "Leader is merely a title. Maybe it's because I'm more acquainted with them." As for the difference in attitude, the people of old did not truly understand what they called God. They believed gods to be lofty and grand, beyond their reach, but the Great Flood made the survivors see the true nature of most who claimed to be deities. Smiling, Nuwa spoke gently, as if he had forgotten he was conversing with a deity. Chapter 341. We found that when humans possess power similar to that of the gods, they too will feel fear, will also be afraid. Cohen told me this. Since gods and humans are differentiated only by power, as long as we have power, naturally there's nothing to be afraid of. Of course, they also gifted life to humans, but after the Great Flood, we had returned life back to them. What about the temple, then? What deity is worshipped there? Does he not need your worship? Seizing what seemed like a loophole, Hecate pointed at the temple shrouded in light and spoke. "That is the temple of the Lord, and indeed he does not need the worship of mortals, or rather, if it were not for the miracles of the angels, perhaps the Lord would not care about our faith. But if we really speak of it, perhaps the Lord also has expectations of humans." Smiling, Nuwa expressed his deepest feelings. The Lord's need for humanity is not for someone specific, nor is it for us to do something. He simply needs us to exist. He does not care about life or death, nor good or bad. As long as humanity has existed in the past, exists now, and continues to exist into the future, that is enough. The very existence of humans is what the Lord hopes for. God loves all people. This is the only explanation I have for it. However, his love stands at the end of time, a greatness mortals cannot understand. Not knowing what to say, even with Hecate's usually lively nature, she fell silent for a moment. Not needing faith, not needing sacrifice, just letting life flourish and eternally exist in the world. This is not so much a demand of the gods as it is a need of the world itself. Even the magic net, at the very least, needs people to use it so Hecate can draw strength from it. If there truly is such an existence in this world, then it must prove that he himself is one of the cornerstones of the world's existence. The power that he has would be unimaginable beyond any god's expectations. To draw strength from the existence of a living being, this is a realm far beyond the understanding of even the strongest divine power. Thus, the journey continued in silence. The sea breeze blew gently, bringing a slight moistness to the air. Soon, when they arrived in front of a wooden house, Nuwa broke the silence. "The city has just been founded, and this is the only kind of place to stay. If your highnesses need anything, you can tell me. It doesn't matter. I've lived in places not much different from this for many years." Returning from her thoughts, Hecate touched the book hanging at her waist. She took a few steps forward and pushed open the wooden house. The door creaked. "We will stay here. But Mr. Priest, that gift you mentioned before, what is it?" As her words ended, Selene also looked toward Nuwa, intrigued, since the so-called gift seemed to be for the moon goddess. And this gift seemed to come from a prophecy, which is what Nuwa had mentioned before, the Lord they worshipped. Although Selene did not know how she had caught his attention, curiosity inevitably arose within her. After all, staying with Hecate, she was unlikely to encounter any insurmountable trouble in the mortal world. "This is it, please take good care of it." Not surprised by Hecate's question, Nuwa took a small box out from his bosom. The box opened to reveal two sparkling, translucent crystals. He picked up one of them and handed it to Selene, who hesitated for a moment before accepting it. "What is this?" The moment her palm touched it, Selene felt a familiar yet strange sensation. This aura was calm and gentle, resonating deeply with her. "A moon." Across from her, Nuwa spoke slowly, as naturally as if he were talking about an apple. "The best gift for the moon goddess is, of course, a real moon." "A moon? Spirit Realm's 7th moon?" Initially a bit puzzled, but with Nuwa's explanation, Selene immediately recognized the source of this special aura. The foundation of the 7 phases meditation method is the contemplation of Spirit Realm's 7th moon, something she knew all too well. This was indeed the key to the 2nd crescent moon of the 7 moons, or rather, it was a special godhood that had been materialized into substance, which the true god could contain. In the past, the moon goddess had never seen what a spirit realm divine nature looked like, but she still managed to deduce its purpose. If she were to contain it, she would become the true god who presides over the 2nd layer of spirit realm's crescent moon. For a deity like her, born with godhood, this was indeed an enhancement, but for territorial gods, this was an unimaginably precious treasure. Yet, when Selene actually held this tangible godhood, she felt some fear. More than the sudden gift, she believed in a saying from the divination field after being with Hecate for so long. "Every gift you receive unearned, fate has already marked its price in the shadows. May I decline it?" Looking at the shining crystal, Selene suddenly said, "Of course, it's just a gift. Since it is a gift, there's no reasoning in forcing someone to accept it. So, Your Highness, are you sure you want to give it up?" Nodding, Nuwa immediately asked. The angel who had delivered the prophecy had already provided an answer. The other party could refuse, and what happened afterward would no longer concern mortals. "I, of course, will take it." Grabbing the hand that Selene held the crystal with, Hecate quickly agreed. The two goddesses looked at each other, and Selene also nodded in agreement. Seeing this, Nuwa bowed slightly, as if to show them respect. Chapter 342. Now that the gift has been delivered, I will not impose any longer. From this day forward, this city shall always open its gates to you both. Dawn was breaking on the horizon, and the moonless night had finally passed. Helios, driving his sun chariot, brought light to the land, and on Mount Olympus, the divine king likewise felt the call of distant bloodlines. The fertility divine authority told him that his 2 children had been born there. Hera's dominion was broken, and Zeus wasn't actually surprised. For when Hecate used the power he once promised to lift Hera's dominion, the divine king had already sensed it and, in fact, was pleased to see it happen. Delaying the birth of his offspring was to appease the goddess best suited to sit upon the throne of the heavenly empress, not genuinely for the sake of who bore his firstborn. Gods do not die, nor do they need heirs. The firstborn is more of a symbolic title, and to the divine king, it hardly mattered who the mother was. Thus, when Hecate removed this shackle, Zeus merely looked forward to the true power of his offspring. Now, following the bloodline connection, the divine king fully discerned the innate divine authority of those 2 children. They were true gods, not demigods, of this there was no doubt, and that highly anticipated firstborn possessed the godhood of light, naturally endowed with the potential to wield formidable divine power. Light, that was ancient Titan god Thea's divine authority, and its presence in his firstborn not only brought a powerful deity to the divine court, but also signified the diminishing of that ancient Titan god's power. Zeus felt immense joy witnessing this, his only regret being that this moment was not immediately known to all. If this were the second era, the miraculous signs of a god's birth would have already spread across the world, celebrating the arrival of this new deity. But in the third age, separated by vast distances, the divine king didn't even know the name of his firstborn son. "And my daughter, her power may be lesser, but it is enough." With focused perception, the sensation from the divine authority informed Zeus that, though his daughter was slightly inferior, her power leaned towards the wildness and chaos of nature, which was by no means weak. Just like the god of sun Helios, with sufficient faith, she too could break the innate limits of her godhood and step into the realm of powerful divine power. Perhaps I should prepare some followers for her in advance. After all, I don't have much time. That's settled then. Contemplating quietly and making his decision, Zeus prepared to pay a visit to Hera. He could guess that the heavenly empress needed his comfort to avoid irrational actions that might affect the growth of his children. However, at the moment when the deity's births concluded, the previously joyful divine king abruptly rose, his expression turning somewhat unpleasant as he looked into the distance. He couldn't actually see what was happening there. The only reason he could sense the birth of his children was thanks to the fertility divine authority and the bloodline connection. But as the guardian of oaths, Zeus suddenly discovered that the connection between him and his newborn daughter was partially severed by an oath. Although it wasn't an oath he had sworn and the bloodline connection still existed, the link between his daughter and Leto seemed to have been transformed by this oath, attaching instead to another being. Originally, Zeus wasn't in a hurry to meet those two children. Leaving them in Leto's care, he believed they would surely become loyal and aspiring deities to him, becoming powerful aides in his rule over the world. But if Leto was no longer responsible for raising them, the outcomes became uncertain. Zeus certainly did not trust in bloodline alone, and few among the gods did. "Hecate, was it you?" With a fluctuating expression, Zeus felt it was time for a serious conversation with the goddess who had once assisted him, but whose attitude remained elusive. Chapter 343: Artemis and the Turning Point of Fate. Zeus had wanted to communicate with Hecate, and this idea wasn't born just today. In fact, he had planned to have a talk with the goddess of the magic net who controlled witchcraft, after gradually understanding the laws of faith's emergence. Today's events were merely a prelude at best. Of course, the reason he intended to have a talk, rather than directly issuing Divine King's decree for Hecate to follow his commands, lies in Zeus' subtle dread of her. As the Divine King, he was never one to repay kindness and return favors, and Metis' fate was the best proof of this. If not because Hecate was so special, how else would Zeus be so generous to her, even personally promising her the privilege to remain independent of the divine court? All of this was, after all, an act of courting and soothing the goddess of the magic net. Early on, before the feast to honor the victors after the epical turn, the Divine King had initially prepared the control over a swath of starry sky as a reward for Hecate. Zeus had hoped for the underworld, but the goddess of the magic net didn't have any entitlement related to the underworld, and there was already the goddess of the nether moon and the river of vows in existence. Thus, the Divine King settled for the vastness of the celestial space as a second choice. On one hand, this could express his intention to co-rule the heavens with the other deities, and on the other, the starry sky wasn't truly under Zeus' control. Even the presence of the moon goddess was much more significant than that of the nascent divine court. Allowing Hecate to go there, she could use the moon as a stepping stone to create checks and balances with the ancient gods in the starry space, preventing any star god from deciding to follow the example of the ancient god of sun and attempting to become the master of the entire celestial realm during the formative moments of the divine court. The lightless celestial deity Zeus was who Zeus was most wary of. Though this Titan principal god had been reclusive for a while, after all, he briefly united with Cronus in the last epoch and launched a war to unify the starry sky. This ancient Titan conducted his affairs with discretion, but he was indeed a deity no less formidable than Oceanus, the god of the ocean. For the then divine king, the very existence of Zeus was a great threat. On earth, the luminous celestial bodies spread light, but only the deities who had truly set foot there knew that it was the lightless celestial bodies that made up the majority of the starry sky. The power of the luminous bodies was fragmented. The star gods and the sun and moon were all part of it, but the sole master of the lightless celestial bodies was Zeus alone. Zeus had made many plans for this, and that seemingly unremarkable feast for the victors was actually the art of balance the divine king had contemplated for a long time, advised by Métis. However, once he had truly taken on the mantle of divine king and perceived the chains of the law that spread across the world, he had adjusted his earlier choices at the first opportunity. Hecate was conferred extra glory and rights by him, and turning around, the divine king secretly reached out to the black-robed goddess Leto. Without the goddess of the magic net, he had to stabilize the celestial space in an alternative way. Even though this goddess beauty was not particularly outstanding among the deities, Zeus still used all his eloquence to ensure Leto stood by his side. Of course, Zeus was now very thankful for his earlier decision. He himself had not expected that this goddess, whom he had not truly valued, would bring him such an impeccable firstborn. Witchcraft, truly a troublesome power. Fortunately, once I take that step, many things will become much simpler. Zeus sighed softly, feeling somewhat headache-stricken. Nowadays, the mortal realm hardly supported deities in unleashing divine power for prolonged battles, and often a single move would be enough to exact a heavy toll, with Poseidon's recent encounter serving as a case in point. But for Hecate, this was actually the greatest benefit. The divine king had no doubt that even if her divine power was far inferior to his, and magic net was not as suited for direct combat as thunder, if he truly confronted Hecate in the mortal realm, the one who would end up losing was none other than himself. Because as long as Zeus couldn't defeat her in a few moves, the scales of victory would clearly tilt toward the goddess of the magic net. Of course, there was more than one deity in the divine court, and should they rise up to attack together, Hecate would certainly be no match. And once Zeus had completed at least half of the rituals and gained further power, this awkward situation would likewise be alleviated. But distant water cannot quench immediate thirst, and for now, the divine king believed there was no need to take things to that extremity. I'll make a visit first, at least I need to understand what exactly she intends to do. In any event, neither Leto nor my eldest son can afford to suffer any mishaps. Having made his decision, the divine king immediately stepped out of the palace. He planned to visit the southeast of the earth, but before leaving, Zeus still waved his hand, summoning his frequently used messenger Zephyrus. "Your Majesty, what are your commands?" Zephyrus, the god of west wind, asked respectfully upon being summoned. "Keep a close watch on Olympus, and don't let Hera do anything unnecessary. If she sends anyone out, stop them first. If she herself intends to leave, tell her that at this point, she cannot change anything, and everything can wait until my return." Zeus spoke gravely, his words not entirely clear in many respects. However, the god of west wind simply bowed slightly, indicating understanding. "I will do so, Your Majesty, but if the heavenly empress insists on leaving, just relay my message. That will suffice." Massaging his temples, the divine king didn't want to think about these headache-inducing matters anymore. Seeing that Zephyrus understood his intent, in the next moment, he transformed into thunder, flying out of Mount Olympus. Chapter 344. In the southeast of the continent, by the shore of Starfall Lake, the trees that had grown rapidly under Demeter's divine power looked as if they had aged 100 years in the blink of an eye, becoming tall and stately. They formed a vast forest of ancient trees. Birds, drawn by an invisible allure, flocked around the forest, reluctant to leave. Among them, several pure white swans circled and danced above the ground. Here, a miracle was unfolding, incomprehensible to mortals but not uncommon in the eyes of the gods. Although the siblings should have been born at the same time, the sister was delivering her brother. The naiads of the lake could not help but pop their heads out of the water to witness this unusual scene, and even some elves, also with slightly swollen bellies, looked on with a mix of fear and longing. Invisible light poured from the void, bringing about a spectacle reminiscent of day turning into night. After 9 flickers, tranquility returned, leaving only a girl who seemed to be 6 or 7 years old, dressed in a skirt made of leaves, holding a newborn baby in her arms. As the world gradually perfected itself, the gods born in the Third Era could no longer easily make the laws of the realm sing for them. Yet, the honors bestowed upon true gods by the world remained unchanged. They possessed divinely given authority and intrinsic true names. Artemis, master of the wilderness, goddess of hunting, of caves, mountains, forests, wild beasts, and midwifery, even bore on her forehead a silver crescent, constantly radiating an aura unlike the moon in the night sky, profound and mysterious. Apollo, the incarnation of light. He didn't have the extensive array of godhoods that his sister did, but merely being the embodiment of light was one of the highest forms of divine authority in the world. The light authority that had split from the ancient Titan god Thea took on an alternative embodiment within him. Even as a newborn, the infant Apollo unwittingly emitted a soft glow that healed the wounds Leto had suffered during childbirth. Even the surrounding naiads felt more vigorous, their previous weariness dissipating in an instant. As the eras passed, and even as Alfheim from the 9 realms integrated, the power of chaos light naturally grew, even if it were divided among many. The fraction that Apollo received was still enough to propel him into the domain of powerful divine beings. In that moment, looking at her son of exceptional birth, Leto felt all her prior suffering had been rewarded. Her gaze swept over the surrounding life forms, which, frightened by the goddess's look, quickly dispersed from the vicinity. After driving away the outsiders, Leto looked back at her daughter in the distance. "Artemis, come here and see your brother," she called out to her daughter, her heart brimming with joy. Artemis was one thing, but the aura of power enveloping Apollo reminded the goddess of the strength and eminence of the Mother of Light. Even without relying on the power of faith, he was destined to stand at the pinnacle among the deity race. In comparison, the fact that her daughter appeared to be a few years old as soon as she was born didn't surprise Leto at all. Just like another goddess yet to be born, who was forcibly constrained within the mother goddess by the laws, the girl did not cease growth. She drew strength and wisdom from nature and instinctively helped her brother into the mortal realm upon her birth. Taking a few steps forward, Artemis handed the baby, bound to her by blood, to Leto. Her bright eyes looked up at her mother, who returned the gaze with a gentle smile. A warm feeling emanated from the infant in her arms, and Leto was about to praise her daughter's competence when her expression suddenly turned to astonishment, a hint of fear almost imperceptible. "Mother Goddess! Silence!" The moment the girl looked up, Leto caught sight of the crescent on Artemis's forehead. The faint silver marking was starkly apparent, and the constraints originating from the Styx River revealed its true nature. It was the power of the moon. Though not abundant, its presence was visibly clear, reminding the black-robed goddess of an accidental encounter she once had at the edge of the stars. There, she had come across a particular broken fragment that harbored a similar power. Previously, Leto had not associated it with the moon because it was unlike Chaos' true moon. Yet, the truth contradicted her initial thoughts. It was not only associated with the moon but had also, due to her fortuitous intrusion, transferred to Artemis in some manner. Leto didn't realize that her first impression had not been wrong. That wasn't the moon of Chaos, but a remnant of the lunar deity from a world long destroyed. Attracted to the present by fate, it had come to a goddess originally predestined to be linked with the moon, who now had no chance of doing so, in becoming part of her power. It was meant to become a sacred artifact born alongside Artemis, but its fragmented and diffuse power was far from sufficient to transform into another form in just a few years and thereby be reborn. It had no choice but to slumber within its master, becoming one with her. Meanwhile, some of Artemis's inherent godhoods gradually transferred to the artifact, nourishing its form and further deepening the connection between them. For Artemis, this wasn't necessarily a bad thing. A sacred artifact born with a deity does not detract from the deity's power, and is entirely different from those forged later. When the artifact takes shape, all that belongs to her will return. But for Leto, this was true trouble indeed. Chapter 345. The oath made by the Styx River cannot be violated. The moment it is established, it entwines itself around the swearer. Before this, neither Hecate, who made the request, nor Leto thought that the thing related to Moon was an item. Their judgment was actually correct, it indeed was an item, yet this item had not yet been born. It was one with its owner, which meant that Leto had to face a reality. Her oath might become even more difficult to fulfill. This was not even an issue that could be resolved by sending the child away, for Artemis is a deity, and to the world she belonged to no one. No god could fulfill an oath with the ownership of another deity. After all, in the divine hierarchy established by chaos, even parents and children are by no means subordinates to one another. Mother Goddess, what's wrong? Looking at Leto, the young goddess was somewhat afraid and somewhat confused. She just looked at the changing expressions of the Mother Goddess, stepping forward seeking comfort. Yet seeing this, Leto took a step back. At that moment, her heart was filled with fear and indecision. She was about to become the first deity in chaos to break the oath of the Styx River. And before this, no one knew what this would truly entail. All gods knew the terror of the Styx River, and therefore, they were unwilling to test these unknown risks under the premise of having eternity. Perhaps the Oathbreaker would be shaken from their godhood, stripped of divine power, or suffer some kind of punishment from the Styx River. Leto knew nothing of this. Her godhood was already weak. Perhaps she would be completely stripped of everything, or maybe even fall into eternal slumber. No, it won't happen. Taking another step back, the goddess clutched the infant in her arms tightly. Amidst the extreme highs and lows, she had already somewhat lost her ability to judge. It won't. I still have Apollo to raise. He will bring me glory and status. Yes, he will make Hera pay for her actions. He will become Zeus's right hand, become the pillar of the divine court. As long as today passes, everything will be all right. Feeling the oppressive force of the oath weighing on her soul, Leto grew increasingly desperate. At one moment, looking at her daughter, bewildered, she suddenly bit her lip and extended her right hand. The power belonging to a deity was released without any restraint, and amidst the vibrations of divine power, Artemis passed out without any resistance. The girl, who had been in the mortal realm for no more than half a day, lay on the ground with a face still marked by incomprehension and doubt, unaware of what had happened or why her mother goddess had suddenly struck her. And before her, faintly, Leto locked onto the embryo of that divine artifact. The strength of the divine artifact was still tightly connected to the origin of Artemis. They were holistically one sacred entity. Feeling all this, Leto's face flashed with hesitation and regret. But in the end, she simply whispered, "Don't blame me. This is perhaps fate. Your godhood was weaker than your brother's. Maybe it's not so bad to be a little more ordinary." Clenching her hand in the air, Leto grasped forcefully, and the embryo of the divine artifact that was still in development was forcibly taken out. Accompanying this, there was a violent turmoil from Artemis's body. Even in unconsciousness, she seemed to feel the pain, but faced with a true god who had reached their peak, the newly born her obviously had no power to resist. The next moment, the evil fruits of utilizing divine power followed suit. The backlash of the laws of the present world fell upon Leto, but the black-robed goddess couldn't care less at this point. She hurled the silver light she had extracted, allowing it to fly towards Hecate's location, following the connection in the void. Subsequently, the force of the oath from the void instantly vanished, and the alert pressure on the soul also disappeared as if it had never existed. Leto gasped for air, her face showing a trace of relief from surviving a catastrophe. She had, after all, avoided the worst outcome, yet at this moment the goddess felt somewhat lost. After a short while, she leaned against a tree trunk, staring blankly at the starry sky above her head, unsure of what she was contemplating, or perhaps she wasn't thinking at all. Wah! In the silent woods, the infant's crying grew louder. As a deity, even though he had just descended to the world, Apollo wasn't supposed to cry like a mortal, yet as a naturally born deity, his acute perception allowed the young him to faintly sense the powers of the Styx River and the present world laws that had descended here one after another. Therefore, the newly descended divine child could only use crying to express his fear, and the increasingly loud cries finally brought Leto's attention back. "Apollo, my child." Reaching out to hold the infant in her arms, the warmth gave her some consolation. Coming back to her senses from the emotional roller coaster, Leto finally realized what she had done. She had made an oath that was impossible to fulfill and then terminated it at the cost of her daughter's origin. Looking at Artemis, who lay on the ground, a sense of absurdity surged in the goddess's heart. She regretted it. Perhaps she shouldn't have contested with Hera for the position of the eldest child. She had yet to gain anything and had already lost a daughter. When Artemis woke up, Leto could already imagine how she would view her mother goddess who had cruelly harmed her as soon as she descended to the world. She, like her sister, faced disaster upon her daughter's birth. And yet, this unwarranted catastrophe was not caused by their daughters themselves. Chapter 346. It seemed as if fate was mocking them. The goddess of Luminous, Phoebe, sought power and status, so she had her husband cooperate with the second-generation divine king. And thus, as a medium between the two, the goddess Asteria gave birth to Hecate, who was without godhood. Leto was so captivated by Zeus's portrayal of the future that she unwittingly made a vow she could not fulfill, ultimately harming her own daughter and announcing the end. So, is this the father god's warning to stay away from the divine king? Leto whispered to herself but knew that she had already given so much. How could she let go of everything and return to the cold starry sky to keep her sister company? "Apollo, you are my hope. Everything I've lost, you will find it for me. Won't you?" "Leto, what have you done?" The goddess spoke to the infant crying in her arms, while on the other side, utilizing the power to traverse the spirit realm, Hecate and Selene silently appeared there. In her hands, a silver light shifted, faintly echoing with the girl on the ground. "I have fulfilled my vow. Now it's yours." Not knowing what else to say, Leto cast one last look at Artemis on the ground. If she could do it all over again, she would never have made such a vow. But it was already too late. Holding Apollo in her arms and harboring hatred for many existences, Leto transformed into a stream of light and flew toward the sea. And behind her, watching the departing Leto and the goddess left behind, Hecate also instantly understood the cause and effect. If it had been a stranger, if she had had nothing to do with the matter from beginning to end, the goddess of the magic net would have hesitated to act against that departing deity. But now, the red-dressed girl hadn't anticipated that a treasure hunt prompted by the guidance of godhood, so ordinary, would turn out like this. "Selene, do you need this divine artifact embryo?" Hecate asked with a forced smile, while beside her, Selene simply shook her head, indicating refusal. The moon goddess understood the hidden meaning in her friend's words. Even without it, she did not desire the treasure. If she had known that it was another deity's companion divine artifact still fused and dependent on a divine body, she would never have coveted it. Let it return to its own master's hands then. But I'm afraid that since its nurturing was forcefully interrupted, it probably can't continue. Accepting the silver light, Selene sighed softly as the embryo returned to its master's side. However, as the moon goddess had said, it merely circled around the head of its owner like a silver crown, never returning to its original position. "No, there's still a chance. Aside from the gift I gave you, isn't there another one?" This was the first time Hecate had caused such a thing due to her own reasons, and although it wasn't her intention or her fault, seeing her actual cousin, a girl with a similar experience to her own past, the goddess of the magic net made a decision. She knew that Zeus on Mount Olympus would not be unaware of his daughter's birth, and he would certainly take action, but Hecate felt that, compared to the divine court, Coan City might be a more suitable place for Artemis to grow up. What she had, this unfortunate girl should also have. And the stone tablet she had once encountered by accident would be replaced by her and Selene. Perhaps in the future, the city could have a nickname, call it Silver Moon City. How about that? Picking Artemis up from the ground, Hecate suddenly suggested. "Ah, Struggling to keep pace with her friend's leap in thought, Selene, still reflecting on the girl's twisted fate, didn't understand how the other had suddenly come up with naming a city of humans. Let's call it that then, regardless of its official name. A nickname, Cohen will agree to it. The transparent portal emerged in front of them, and Hecate stepped through first. Seeing that her friend didn't want to say more, Selene promptly followed to leave. The secluded grove became quiet once again. No one knew that it was here, in this place, that siblings who should have been close took vastly different paths, one following their original destiny, the other towards a divergence. Perhaps it was also destined. Without today's change, there would have been another, for Artemis and the divine court were bound to drift apart. For tens of thousands of years ago, on a day when the illusory moon rose into the still vacant sky, becoming the only luminance of chaos's night, the fate related to the moon had already deviated from its original script towards the unknown and miraculous. As for whether this was good or bad, no one knew. The marks etched in history would pass judgment on all this. In an exterior realm, the courtyard, central floating island. On the ground, in the center of a massive pit, a spring formed a small lake, and beside it, a magical tree bearing 8 branches rose about 100 meters tall. Hovering above the island, in front of a simple wooden house, the projected consciousness of the world serpent sat by a stone table, quietly viewing the scenes within a silver mirror. He was originally concerned with the whereabouts of the gift he had given, but even he had not anticipated that things would develop along such a trajectory. The siblings, who were once close, had gone their separate ways from the start. So you mean to say, even this was within your expectations? Ha, that is truly far-sighted. Asmodeus had come here in response to the sudden changes in the Styx River, which had surged with such clear force for the first time, coinciding with the imminent awakening of the Mother of Demons. As the Lord of the Nine Hells, he could not ignore it. However, upon just arriving at the courtyard, the Lord of the Nine Hells had witnessed quite the spectacle. He still remembered the day and the moon he had promised to the other party, and although an eon had passed without the shadow of the Stygian sun, the influence of the moon phases had persisted to this day. You are overthinking it. The nature of uncertain fate is change, and even as a so-called emblem of it, I would not know the direction of change. If I could really grasp it, then the supposed uncertain would be reduced to ridicule. In a soft voice, Lane waved his hand, and the round mirror before him dispersed. No matter how fate may change, the outcome is always determined by the strength within. Let Artemis write her own story. However, Silver Moon City is indeed a good name. Let's talk about you instead, Asmodeus. The first of the demon gods has descended, instinctively guarding by Moya's side, drawing from the wisdom and thought she brought from the present world, and the remaining 5 will not be too far behind. When each of them is born, the Mother of Demons will awaken. So now, are you prepared to face them? You're wrong. It should be we prepared to face them. Correcting himself, Asmodeus did not linger over past matters of the present world. How the moon fares was irrelevant to him. Zeus would eventually swallow the bitter fruit of his own troubles. By comparison, the first ever, and inevitably the most threatening, Abyss invasion was the real challenge before him. There's only so much I can do. In the face of the Abyss itself, only the purest clash of forces is the sole method of response. As for the rest, it's up to them. Gazing through the barriers of worlds, the Lord of the Nine Hells could see that on the upper levels of Hell, certain preparations had long been underway. The matter of the demon gods will be dealt with by others, but dealing with my former sister is up to you. Of course. Nodding, Lane felt that the greatest threat Moya posed to him was likely not her strength, but that indescribable countenance. Though she had not yet awakened, Lane could already anticipate how much malice her visage would harbor towards his true self in the spirit realm. To his true self, Moya didn't really count for much, but it wasn't necessarily the same for this incarnation. Defeating her in the Abyss would undoubtedly be a difficult feat. Chapter 347 Contract and Divine Arts. The precursor of the Mother of Demons, Moya, Mnemosyne and Lane have harbored a grudge for quite a long time, although this so-called grudge has always been unilaterally perceived by the other party, and Lane has never paid it any attention. It was not until this goddess of Titans suffered a loss at the hands of the newly born Atlas that her existence truly caught Lane's attention, as she chose to dive headfirst into Tartarus. Now that she has lost her former appearance and turned into a form even more twisted than the Hecatonchires, one can only imagine the resentment that smoldered within Moya when she awoke. She had gained the power she had longed for, yet she had also turned into a monster unrecognized by the deities. Had it not been for Tartarus, which had birthed her, guiding her choices, and had she not set her sights on hell to draw from the power of the abyss after her descent, Lane would have been well prepared to encounter her in the spirit realm by now. Of course, if she truly dared to come, it would most likely be a one-way ticket. If you have a plan in mind, that's good. Moya, favored by Tartarus, is not someone they can handle. Pleased with the satisfactory reply, Asmodeus nodded. He was ready to leave, but when his peripheral vision caught a glimpse of the little tree growing beneath the floating island, he could not help but recall the ideas about the mortal strategy that Mephisto had expounded to him a few days prior. He needed something that could constrain mortals while earning their trust, something that could be used extensively and on a large scale. Upon learning of his ideas, the Lord of the Nine Hells had originally planned to try diluting the power of the Styx River, but later he discovered that the true power of the Styx Oath did not lie in the river itself, but had a different origin. The waters of the Styx represented more the punishment for breaking an oath. They possessed some special divinity that could wash away the power of the deities. Therefore, its water could perhaps be formulated into a special ink used to inscribe the contents of a contract, but the material to carry the oath itself would need a different source. A sworn oath tree from which power can be harnessed at a cost. I really don't know where you get such things from. After observing for a while, Asmodeus stretched out his hand and called over a leaf from the Tree of Life. The golden glow radiated from the veins of the leaf, with some kind of power flowing within. The Lord of the Nine Hells studied it carefully, and after a while, extracted the power contained within the leaf, turning it into a stack of darkly colored paper in his palm. This tree must, like the Styx River, gain power by witnessing vows and punishing oath-breakers. He stated affirmatively and then looked towards Lane's avatar. Hand these leaves over to me. Let Mephisto take them to the mortal realm. Only there can it spread far and wide. Perhaps one day, this divine tree might possess power that rivals that of Styx. Regarding this, I have no objections. Take it if you want. The fallen leaves of the Tree of Life are indeed the best material for contracts, but I'm afraid you have some additional work to do. Lane nodded in agreement, but he looked at the newly grown sapling, which did not have many leaves on it at all. Leaves infused with power did not come from nothing. They required sufficient strength to support their growth. If relying only on the current ones, they were likely not enough for use. As you can see, although its nature is extraordinary, it hasn't grown long enough. If you want it to grow enough leaves, you'll need to provide it with more nutrients. Nutrients? Yes, but that's not hard to obtain. Just find any life rich in energy and submerge their corpses into the fountain. The energy from their bodies will be purified by the water, turning their life force into nutrients, and the remaining matter will sink to the bottom of the lake, becoming soil, and become part of the world. The Leoner Spring was originally a fountain from another realm. Reinvigorated after drying up, it became part of the central courtyard, continuing its companionship with its former neighbors. Its power symbolizes vitality and purification, the opposite of the darkness and evil of the Nine Hells, and its waters are the best nourishment for the Tree of Life's growth. When it first arrived in the central courtyard, like the initial Tree of Life, Lane extravagantly allowed it to draw from the origin of the realm to achieve its first growth. But to continue to develop, it would need to find another way. The bodies of foreign life forms are excellent materials, as the alien energy within them is purified by the fountain water. Their life force turned into nutrients, and the remaining matter settles at the bottom of the lake, becoming mud, a part of the world. Life that's hard to find in the abyss. Besides the demon gods, there seems to be no other life here. In contemplation, Asmodeus looked at the abyss where the materialization of the outer world was becoming more evident. as if he understood something. Lane did not keep him in suspense but explained directly. There will be some. After suffering damage, Tartarus's instincts begin to mimic hell and the present world. Life is an important part of it, and even the materials have been prepared by someone for it in advance. The Lord of the Nine Hells knew what Lane was referring to. The materials were the Flame Kingdom that had merged into the Abyss before. If it weren't for the incubation of the demon gods not yet complete, perhaps some primordial life born in flames would already be appearing here one after another. Let Mephisto figure it out then, offering the bodies of demons in exchange for contracts from this place. This indeed fits the very rules of this tree itself. Chapter 348. At this moment it wasn't just a matter of the contract. Asmodeus even received more inspiration. The Leonar Spring could rely on the power of purification to accelerate the transformation of life from foreign realms. But the world itself could also do it, albeit requiring more time. Life born in one world inherently contains an extremely faint force, and if they die in another world, there's no doubt that it's a subtle form of weakening. One or two are insignificant, but thousands are quite substantial. When Moya awakens, the Nine Hells' direct theft of abyssal powers will cease. Then this method may become another way to strengthen oneself using the abyss. Perhaps the war between the two realms should continue indefinitely. As long as the victor is always me, that would be fine. Asmodeus mused to himself but didn't say it out loud. He turned and left. Seeing this, Lane smiled and dispersed his form, returning his consciousness to the body of the Ouroboros. The vast atrium fell quiet again, with only the water of the Leonar Spring still flowing. In the eastern region by the sea, thunder flashed across the sky, heralding rolls of resonant thunder, the sign of the Divine King's travels. Without taking anyone with him and following the sensation from earlier, Zeus made his way swiftly. As the sun set and then rose, when the border between land and coast gradually came into view, the Divine King finally saw a vast lake. Unsurprisingly, divine birth had taken place here. Not much time had passed. The air was still filled with the lingering essence of when two deities were born, attracting many birds to gather. They lingered, greedily inhaling this power that could change their fate, wishing to sublimate the essence of their lives to obtain longer lifespans and greater strength. Yet, fortune and calamity often accompany each other. Before the birds could realize what was happening, with the flash of a silver serpent, they turned to ashes. This was not an intentional act by Zeus. The thunder that spontaneously surrounded the Divine King did not avoid these mortal creatures. A mere accidental touch turned them to dust. Descending to the ground, Zeus paid no attention to the lives bold enough to obstruct the Divine King's path. He was only interested in the one presence worth his attention. By the spacious lakeside on a towering tree, a figure in a blue gown, unfamiliar yet familiar, sat on a branch gently swinging her legs. Gazing at her profile, that tranquil and detached demeanor even made Zeus lost in thought for a moment. However, the next moment, when this unknown young girl turned around due to the Divine King's arrival, Zeus suddenly realized her identity. Hecate, is it you? Surprised, in the impression of the Divine King, this impressive goddess did not look like this. Compared to her previous liveliness and unruliness, this blue-gowned goddess who seemed slightly older, although just reached adulthood, had a calm like the ocean vastly different from her youthful days in a red gown. However, though one's appearance and demeanor can deceive, godhood cannot. In Zeus's perception, the girl in the blue gown was the embodiment of the magic net. The network spanning the world pulsed with her breath, and the silver fire invisible to commoners, like silver star spots, adorned her gown, bringing glory to its mistress. Moreover, compared to her other self, it seemed like this Hecate and the magic net were even more deeply entwined. On her, Zeus even saw a hint of true ancient god traits. They not only possessed godhood but were also a manifest symbol of it. Just as the sky is Uranus himself and the earth is Gaia, the connection between the magic net and the blue-gowned girl was extraordinarily close. By contrast, the red-gowned Hecate seemed more like a user, not the true embodiment of the magic net. It's me. I've been waiting for you for a long time. In the face of the divine king's bewilderment, the girl in the blue gown responded with a gentle smile. On the other side, Zeus calmed his somewhat restless heart. It wasn't just the appearance that was different. It seemed her personality was also quite distinct. At this moment, the divine king couldn't help but think of a special rumor that circulated among the gods. Triphased incarnation. I didn't expect you to possess such a talent, he said gravely. Zeus had indeed not anticipated that Hecate had such a gift. The formation of a triphased incarnation required natural birth. It was extremely difficult to have it otherwise. It needed ability, a certain potential, and a unique opportunity. Without this chance, even the primordial gods could not obtain this miraculous trait. With the opportunity but lacking the ability, it would still be missed. Like the three graces, or originally the three fates of destiny. If they could be born in the form of one god instead of three, then they would be natural triphase deities, possessing much more powerful strength. But due to their lack of potential, this situation ultimately did not occur. With a slight smile, the girl in the blue gown didn't respond to Zeus's comment. Her third incarnation was still far from formed, and even she herself was unclear about what could bring it about. Hecate, you must know why I am here. Where are my newly born children? Returning from his surprise, Zeus also remembered the purpose of his visit. His aura became sharp, and facing his questioning, the girl in the blue gown did not explain but simply waved her hand. Chapter 349. See for yourself, Zeus. This is what happened here once. Everything has its origin. With the will of the goddess of the magic net, an elemental mist spread around, projecting light and shadows, and the scenes of what had happened before began to unfold in front of the divine king. From Hecate following the scent of the moon, to her pact with Leto, and then to the silhouette of the robed goddess leaving. Finally, the vision ended inside the temple. Before the unconscious Artemis, a mortal took out a multifaceted crystal from a box, casting it into the silvery bands of light surrounding her. Centered on the crystal, the scattered forces reconvened, forming a delicate crown that rested atop the girl's head. The new moon crown, upon seeing its creation, even if only a vision, Zeus also learned its name. Like the sun, the original moon of chaos wouldn't change with time. It appeared in its phases to the eyes of earthly life because the illusory moon hung in the sky since antiquity had such power. But now, with the merging of the spirit realm's lunar phases and the residual power of a foreign moon deity, this divine artifact became a symbol of the crescent moon's changes. Moreover, it could command all beasts, dominate all spirits, and even the wearer would possess special privileges on the surface of the spirit realm. As the mist dissipated, the lakeside returned to its original state. The area fell silent for a moment, perhaps digesting all that had been seen. Zeus narrowed his eyes and asked lightly, "So what are you trying to say? That you plan to leave my daughter in this city of sinners, letting her consort with mortals, separated from the divine court?" His voice wasn't loud, but the dissatisfaction it contained was evident. Zeus had recognized the origins of these people, a group of bronze humanity that had escaped from death. They had gained the protection of deities from the spirit realm, so the divine king had no intention of troubling them further. The Sea Emperor was the main cause of their destruction. Let them contest with Poseidon's minions. However, leaving Artemis here was another matter entirely. To these humans, Poseidon surely was the prime cause of their ruin, but Zeus didn't think his own image would be any more favorable. Growing up in such an environment, it was almost predictable how Artemis would view him as her father, the divine king. Moreover, the original huntress goddess might only possess intermediate divine power, but with the new moon crown, her potential had risen once more. Given enough time, she could almost certainly become a principal god of Olympus with the help of faith, furthering his grand path. You can try to take her away. In response to Zeus's words, the girl in the blue dress replied with a smile. But I will stop you, as will the deities of the spirit realm who guided these humans here. If you truly wish to do so, I suggest you bring more people next time. She is my daughter, Hecate. She is inherently a member of the divine court. Frowning, Zeus responded gravely. At this moment, he appeared to be a decent father, yet there was no third person present, and both knew very well what kind of deity the divine king really was. Ha! Don't make it sound like I'm bullying you because of my position, Zeus. With a light chuckle, the girl in the blue dress's smile slowly faded. At this moment, she was like an ocean about to unleash gigantic waves, quiet yet unfathomable. You knew where Leto was, knew that your daughter was trapped inside her, yet chose to do nothing, that she would meet me and end up making this unintended vow. Who is the real reason behind it? As the girl finished speaking, the aura of the divine king faltered slightly. Just as Hecate had said, Zeus himself was the biggest source behind the events unfolding to this point. In the realm of the gods, where power often trumped reason, when the powers of both sides were not overwhelmingly different, reason found its place to thrive. Thus, facing the girl's challenge, the divine king still offered an explanation. Perhaps, Hecate, in this matter, I truly was too influenced by Hera. But that was not my intention, and I hope you can understand. Offhandedly shifting the source of the problem to his queen of gods, Zeus seemed to realize that he would not be able to take Artemis away easily today. However, that could be discussed later, as no one knew how this child would view him when she grew up, and besides, he had another purpose for this visit. By the way, Hecate, I recall you once said, as the goddess of the magic net, you promised that anyone could use the magic net, whether good or evil, whatever form of life. I'm not mistaken, am I? Yes. Seeing the mood soften, the girl in the blue dress returned to her gentle demeanor. She leaned back against the tree trunk, stroking the long hair falling around her neck, and acknowledged his statement. If you wish to use the magic net, I have no objections. Just as the sun doesn't refuse anyone from bathing in its radiance, the magic net will not refuse anyone from using its power. So long as the user does not try to harm the magic net itself, the magic net will always be open to them. What if I want to use it to transmit divine power? Zeus asked with an implied meaning. If it's pure divine power, the magic net will not accept it. The current law will also sense the divine power used as a medium through it. Raising her head, the girl in the blue dress realized what Zeus wanted to do. The mix of divine power and elements that diluted special power, the divine king could sense it, so it made no sense for her not to. However, due to her possession of magic power, she hadn't given much thought to this weaker version of divine power. But now, it seemed Zeus had other ideas. Without magic power, even if someday he learned what meditation was, Zeus was destined never to reach the proficiency of those adept in it. Thus, his attempt to find a power that could contend with witchcraft didn't surprise the girl in the blue dress. So, a power that isn't detected by law can be used, right? Nodding her head, in front of Hecate, Zeus slowly extended his hand, a pale golden energy flowing within his palm. It had some characteristics of divine power, but not as formidable as pure divine power. It was more akin to the gentler aspects of divine power and had eschewed the more destructive effects. Such power should not be rejected by the magic net. After all, it also has elemental presence in itself. Chapter 350 Forbidden Fruit. Elements are a special kind of substance, both ethereal and corporeal, and they also possess excellent compatibility. This characteristic allows them to blend with nearly everything in the world and transform into new, controllable energies. That was how magic power originated. It is an imitation of the almighty divine power, a product of spirit and element merging and sublimating. However, the magic power strived for elevation. It grew stronger with the mental will of the spellcasters. But the force in Zeus's hands was not like this. It was a degradation of divine power, a dilution and blunting. What determined its potency was the extent of dilution, and the proportion of divine power in it could never exceed 1/12. It seemed to be a limitation. Once the proportion of divine power was too high, the element could no longer maintain balance with it, ensuring that this special energy inevitably remained a step behind divine power. Yet, at the same time, this dilution allowed it to escape from the hands of deities and be harnessed by other life forms. Zeus had conducted similar experiments before, He had allowed nymphs and wild beasts to merge with this energy he termed sacred power, and indeed they could use it. Those with strong spirits and acute perceptions could hold more and purer sacred power. Those with weak spirits and dull perceptions could only control weak and diffuse sacred power. Moreover, the Divine King discovered that these beings, bathed in his power day and night, unless vehemently opposed to him, would subtly deepen their faith in him, while the rest could at least maintain it unchanged. This undoubtedly strengthened Zeus's previous notion. Since magic power could become witchcraft, there was no reason this sacred power, from his own hand, couldn't transform into divine arts bestowed upon mortals by deities. As long as they selected those faithful mortals to be endowed with this power, they could become true priests who spread the faith for the gods, rather than the arrogant fools taught by Prometheus. These devout divine practitioners would become a privileged class among humans, solely to disseminate the glory of deities. I've said it before, the magic net doesn't refuse others' use, but while pure elements can perfectly fit on the strings of the magic net, it doesn't mean other forces can. After looking at the pale golden energy in Zeus's hand for a while, the girl in the blue dress said indifferently, "There might be some loss. The farther it's transmitted, the more obvious the loss becomes. Part of it is due to the subtle friction with the magic net strings, and another part will be absorbed by the magic net as nutrients for its operation." The magic net had been expanding incessantly since its creation, beyond the reaches of the stars, to the ends of the seas, and even into some chaotic wastelands, so it naturally longed for external power. Of course, the goddess of the magic net could forcibly prevent this absorption of energy in transit, but she saw no reason to do so. Never mind. A mere trace of divine power, as long as it can flow in the magic net, that's sufficient. Nodding her head to the Divine King, this slight loss was inconsequential. Having settled the matter, Zeus's expression grew relaxed. The divine arts issue was resolved, and another piece was added to his puzzle in the mortal realm. All that remained was to wait, as endless faith would come to him. "Hecate, regarding my daughter, I have another matter to discuss." Having concluded the business, Zeus was ready to leave, but recalling his daughter, designated to be his right hand, had gone away, the Divine King still wanted to attempt something. So he turned to the girl in the blue dress, making a reasonable request. "My daughter may grow up here, but that doesn't mean the bond between her and me is thus severed. Today's events occurred, not by my own volition. So in the future, when my daughter comes of age, I will return here. On that day, no one can stand in my way again." He spoke of coming of age. But Zeus was prepared to wait until after his own half-ritual was complete to return. Although by then Artemis would surely have developed her own likes, dislikes, and view of the world, no longer allowing her parents to dictate her path as a child might, the Divine King believed that he could persuade her to return to Olympus. "Then come. As long as that day arrives, just don't be disappointed." After a moment of silence, the girl in the blue dress took out a crystal ball from her sleeve. She looked at it while Zeus watched, puzzled, then nodded in agreement. "Very well, Hecate. I will respect her own wishes when the time comes." He nodded in response. A royal ritual cannot be achieved through coercion. But whether through enticement or affection, Zeus believed that he could always fulfill his goals. Finally, he glanced toward the east, the direction from which Leto and Apollo had departed in the previous images. Before coming, Zeus had intended to bring them back to the Mount of the Gods with Artemis to prevent similar events. But now he had changed his mind. Apollo, he would return to Olympus in a state of glory. But before that, he needed an adventure to deepen his reverence for his Divine King. "May our friendship endure, Hecate. And well, I must say, I still prefer seeing you as you are now."